Hello, bruv. I hope to finish off the Bürgermeister's daughter today. Let's see if we can knock this out, bruv. Collections of official documents like the Bushler family. Oh, we already did that. Well, I did it. You've done nothing. You've done nothing for me, bruv. The weight of the evidence. What had been at stake for Philip and Agatha in these long, drawn-out proceedings was their right to keep a grossly disproportionate share of the family inheritance. Although a case was made on Anna's behalf, in the end she got no more of it than what the agreement with her siblings had originally provided. And not even all of that. Still, given the circumstances of her case, the settlement seemed a fair one to the majority of witnesses, and some righting of the injustice done her by her father's testament. More was at stake for the city council. Anna had accused the city not only of illegally arresting her, but also of brutalizing her while she was held prisoner in the tower, and, after falling ill, chained to a bed in the hospice. If those allegations were true, the city was guilty of denying due process to a citizen, and thereby threatening public order. The willingness of the imperial court and Rottweil to fine Hall for breach of safe conduct clearly indicates that the imperial government was no more of a mind to tolerate such anarchy in its cities than it was among factious noblemen in the countryside. Because of Anna's challenge, Hall faced still another confrontation with a higher court and possibly new punitive fines, a most burdensome prospect for an imperial city jealous of its sovereignty and weary of conflict with Anna Bushler. Although Anna's failure to answer the 3 summonses became the immediate legal grounds for her arrest and incarceration in 1544, witnesses make it clear that her public attacks on the city council in Speyer played the larger role. According to Councilman Conrad Seither, her contemptuous letters to the council and her siblings and her disdaining of the council hither and yon were not less the reason. The militia seized her in Munkheim. She was arrested, another testified, for the sake of good order, after having been heard to say inappropriate things about the council in Speyer and elsewhere, and even to threaten the city with harm, behavior deemed completely unbefitting a citizen sworn to uphold her government. Council witnesses also recalled her intemperate remarks in Verzelmann's house, when she subjected Hall's delegation to many threatening and sarcastic words. Oh no! As well as her equally embarrassing public ridicule of her brother at the imperial diet. The 70-year-old Limburger and sometimes city servant and messenger Hans Stahel also had a log for the fire. He had known Anna for 40 years, going all the way back to the time when she worked for the Schenken in Castle Limburg. After the collapse of her agreements with her siblings in 1544, he frequently heard her complain about her brother's success in driving her out of Hall. It enraged her no end that Philip remained in their parents' house and enjoyed their property while she was once again living a near vagabond's life. Stadel never heard her vow to get even with her brother through the courts. Several witnesses testified that Anna had carried incriminating letters on her person when Hall militiamen arrested her in Munkheim. Some of these letters she apparently managed to destroy before they could be taken from her and read. According to reports, she shredded several with her teeth while in transit to Hull and threw them away with her excrement to ensure their loss. The confiscated surviving letters were sent to the imperial court, evidently to document the city's charges of her vicious slanderings. Although the witnesses offer no summary of their contents, an Orangen shoemaker testified that one of the letters was from a physician in Speyer, perhaps a medical prescription, while another was a copy of the defamation charges lodged against her by her brother. As for Anna's treatment during her imprisonment in Hull, witnesses for the city insisted that she had been given food, drink, and every care, and they scoffed at her charges of mistreatment. Hans Stahel, who had orders to feed her according to need during her weeks in the tower, could recall no complaints from her about the treatment she received. As for Anna's charges that the city had plans to confine her for life, Councilman Melchior Wetzel acknowledged that a special room had been under construction for her, but had not been completed because of her escape. and Leinart Bleyemeyer confirmed that the council had indeed ordered a special cell to be built, although he could not recall the council's exact intentions at the time. Witness from outside, the council had also heard talk about an eternal prison for Anna. Barbara Dolan knew about it, but she could not say whether Anna was to be put there for life. Nicholas Schmidlin, a tailor who worked for Count George of Hohenlohe, testified that Anna had first been confined in the tower, but had fallen ill there and had to be placed in the hospice, where her attendants had chained her to a bed in a small room. It was at that time that he had heard rumors about the construction of a special room for her with iron gates that opened and closed, although he acknowledged that he never actually saw such a cell himself. On the other hand, Bürgermeister Leonhard Fugte emphatically denied that the city council ever contemplated imprisoning Anna for life. No, by no means did anyone want to arrest or imprison her eternally. Our intention was only to place her in a safe, womanly custody for a while. Despite the Bürgermeister's protestations, at least one councilman remembered the episode with embarrassment and regret, indicating that there had indeed been division within the council over the action. According to Michael Seiboth, Anna's imprisonment was undeserved and should never have happened, because more things may be overlooked in a woman than in a man. That sentiment was typical of the age and shared by a number of witnesses who, on the other hand, disapproved of Anna's behavior, yet, on the other, thought her father and the city council also held some responsibility for it. Women at this time were believed to be physically, intellectually, and morally weaker than men, and hence more vulnerable to harm, deceit, and temptation, and thus in greater need of protection and supervision by men in their lives. That, however, did not, as logic would seem to dictate, increase male tolerance and sympathy for the weaker sex when, as biology alleged inclined it to do, it succumbed to its weaker nature. A woman caught in adultery might legally be executed on the spot by her husband, but not the presumably stronger husband caught in adultery by his wife, and only men living in the Middle Ages could deem it a kinder execution for a capital crime to drown, bury alive, or burn a woman at the stake rather than decapitate, hang, or tear her apart on the wheel as was done with men. If, however, unlike Michael Seiboth, the other councilmen of Hull had no apologies for treating Anna like a man, neither did any of them step forward to proclaim her arrest and imprisonment, evidently for eternity, to be the city council's finest hour. The grieving Mary from an entombment scene, sculpted from lindenwood in Künzelsau around 1470, on display in Hull's Hellish Frankische Museum. Chapter 7, The Morale. Or is it the Moral? To the city's great relief, the imperial court accepted its... Alright, we'll skip back there, bruv. Accepted its agreement that... To the city's great relief, the imperial court accepted its argument that Anna had escaped her cell before this council could act on the penal mandate, ordering her release, thereby voiding her charge that the city had willfully disobeyed the higher court's order to release her. To all intents and purposes, Anna's two other charges, that her siblings had forced a devious and unkept agreement on her, and that the council had unlawfully arrested and imprisoned her, were rendered moot as well by her sudden death in January 1552. Her widowed husband kept the litigation going until 1554, seeking in vain to win an all too belated justice for Anna, as well as a share of the Büchler family inheritance for himself as her surviving spouse. The majority of witnesses did not, however, support Anna's charges, and had she lived to hear a final ruling from the imperial commissioners, the judgment would most likely have been a great disappointment to her. Although lacking a happy ending, our story is not, however, without salutary lessons. For in that distant age, as in our own, rationality and madness accompanied one another, the one as prominent and real as the other. The most immediate lesson of the Bouchard family history is that protracted self-destructive litigation is no novelty of the 20th century, particularly during the second half of the 16th century, When the witch craze peaked in Germany, ordinary people proved all too willing to resolve their petty grievances with their neighbors by accusing them of harmful magic. And the clergy and the politicians learned to enlarge their powers by trying old women and men in the witch court, all to the delight and profit of the rapidly growing legal profession. In this regard, the Bushler family litigation was another sign of the times. The 3 courts in which Anna directly pled her case, however, were no witch courts, and she did not end up on a pyre, or chained forever to a table in her father's house, or left to rot in the eternal prison contemplated for her by the city council. Year after year, one court or another heard and acted on her complaints, and some of what she demanded she eventually got. Indeed, many of her contemporaries believed that she was treated better than she deserved, given her defiant trampling of the values and expectations of her age. Another obvious lesson of our story is that the conflation of legislative, executive, and judicial powers in a single body can indeed be as perilous to the rights and well-being of individuals as the American founding fathers warned in the 18th century. The political theorists of the 16th century knew that too, however, and they warned their fellow citizens no less urgently and eloquently of the danger of concentrating political power in the hands of a few. Our modern concepts of representative government and the right of lower officials to depose tyrants for the good of the body politic also have their origins in these early centuries. Specifically, these now self-evident truths grew out of the experience of the late medieval churchmen who battled the self-aggrandizing and schismatic papacy in both books and councils, and the suffering of German Lutherans and French and Netherlands Calvinists who endured defeat and tyrannous rule at the hands of imperial Spain. If, despite the successful constitutional struggle of 1510 to 1512, the city council of all still appears to have remained a petty aristocracy of wealth and privilege throughout the 16th century. The same council also prized, celebrated, fought to retain, and foresaw the enlargement of the political representation the city had by that time attained, and the council was as ready to retire or punish a Bürgermeister for moral and ethical failings, which it did in the case of Hermann Buchler, as to dispose or ostracize councilmen for resisting self-interested real political change, as those who opposed the Reformation after 1523 discovered. Anna Buchler may not have received justice and fairness in her home court sufficient to assuage the modern conscience, but she was headed there. Because the city council was not a legal island, but subject to a network of imperial courts willing to prod and override it, she did not end up empty-handed. But that also happened in part because the city council itself, for all its many failings, remained the principal body, some of whose members sympathized with her plight. Still, a third clear lesson of Anna's story is that women at this time were not powerless victims of male rule. They had both the ability and the opportunity, in the absence of modern equality, to define themselves and their self-worth in fully satisfying ways through the spheres of life and work then available to them both within and outside the home. Despite the limited nature of women's educational and vocational opportunities in comparison with men's, and the fact that women could participate in the most important civic and political activities only vicariously, they still had inalienable rights and significant access to the courts, by which they could climb onto the stage of history and leave their mark, as Anna did, although women everywhere faced an ancient gender-based discrimination that men did not. Its effect on them was not altogether unlike the discrimination most contemporary males experienced because of their inferior social standing. Gender alone did not entitle any man to the rights and protections of citizenship, Bürgerrecht, which the widowed Anna could purchase on October 17th, 1543. Thanks to the new property and wealth she momentarily received after the settlement of the family estate with her siblings. Nor could gender alone qualify males to hold public office. Only wealth, property, and social standing had gained such rights, protections, and privileges for both males and females, nor could the vast majority of men, any more than women, expect to receive a university education and pursue a lucrative career in theology, law, or medicine. Most urban males succeeded to the handicraft trades and businesses of their fathers and grandfathers as predictably and docilely as women followed their mothers into the textile and food processing industries. A substantial number of males were also accused of witchcraft. Approximately 1 out of every 5 of the perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 people suspected, tried, and executed for witchcraft between 1400 and 1700 was a male. As in modern times, one's material position in the world was as much one's destiny as biology. Anna's story suggests that the sexism that seemed so pervasive in the literature and laws of late medieval and Renaissance Europe was not as prominent or severe in actual family life and social practice. The dark portrayals of women that appear in rare fringed tracts like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, 1487, the Church's great manual for the detection and punishment of witches, certainly merit the label misogynist, hating and dismissive of women, written by 2 German Dominican inquisitors who were obsessed with the alleged seductive and violent nature of womankind. They believed, for example, that witches had sex with the devil and could make men's penises magically disappear. This pornographic classic provoked lurid interest in perverse women among the new reading public, and for a century and a half it placed in the hands of both church and state an insidious tool for self-aggrandizement. The imaginations of 2 15th century clerics cannot, however, be read as serious commentary on the real-life relationships between men and women in late medieval Germany. For all their crudity, ridicule, and worry over womankind's weaknesses, the mainstream didactic literature and popular entertainments of these centuries were far more inclined to encourage a woman's moral striving and inner talents than to dismiss or demonize her. In both everyday life and times of crisis, women in the 16th century had access to effective personal and legal resources. As Anna demonstrated, for almost a quarter of a century, even bad girls could challenge manifest abuse and law-breaking at the highest levels of their societies, commanding public attention and do so with a degree of success. Society's general attitude toward women at this time is more accurately described as condescending and protective than as hateful and dismissive. To his fellow citizens, Hermann Büchler's treatment of his daughter was both unusual and unacceptable, and was neither condoned nor left unpunished. And although the consequences were not of a magnitude capable of satisfying a modern sense of justice any more than they could Anna's at the time, the Bürgermeister did lose his position in the city council, which, after much outside prodding, also forced him to give his daughter some of what was legally hers. There is a final lesson to be learned from Anna's story that is not as obvious as the aforementioned. It is one about human nature and character that transcends gender and politics and may be more important than both. Anna's story is both stranger than fiction and truer than history, and neither the novelist nor the historian has yet done it any justice. Despite her prominence in the historical record, she has been given scant attention from modern scholars, and even that little bit has been obscured by the larger figures and events in her life. On the few occasions when she popped up in a literary or historical work, it has been in the most opprobrious of roles: a disobedient daughter, a promiscuous woman, a disloyal citizen, an ungrateful sibling, a hateful widow. In 1922, German novelist Leonhard Frank published a popular biography of Hermann Büchler, into which he inserted under a pseudonym a fictitious recreation of Anna's life. The novel's focus was on the constitutional crisis of 1510 to 1512 and the heroic role Hermann Büchler played in it. From the perspective of the 1920s novelist, the Bürgermeister's feat was a memorable victory for the political freedom of the German people. Hermann Buschler appears in the novel as an ordinary man who is said to have become the darling of the common man and the hero of Hall because he listened to the voices of his forefathers and heeded the call of history. The high point of the story is the dramatic meeting with the Emperor set in Frankfurt, when Hermann Buschler, clad in his marvelous attire, literally put his life on the line for Hall's non-noble beggars and artisans. In the novelist's account, Emperor Maximilian reminisces for a few moments with his bold supplicant after the encounter, recalling a visit he had made to Hall a decade earlier, at which time he lodged in the home of Hermann Buschler's father, a man he claims still to remember well. Anna appears in the story as the Bürgermeister's beautiful but wayward daughter Suzanne, a girl who loves to dance and defy her parents, and whose behavior poses for her famous father a test of paternal devotion and courage almost as great as the testing of his political will by the city's constitutional crisis. Suzanne's story is told to extol Hermann Buschler's heroic qualities as a father, complementing his heroic qualities as a politician. If the novelist's account of her life is not totally the product of his own imagination, some of it may derive from local legends about fathers with difficult daughters. For the Anna found here is not the woman of historical record. In the story, Suzanne is caught in the mysticism of love with a worthless ensign named Hans, Daniel Troutwain, a convicted felon who once spent 3 months in jail. Defying her parents, she persists in seeing him. She also has a respectable suitor from a good whole family, George Sieferheld, Erasmus of Limburg, a man with solid connections and a certain future, who once brought her a personal greeting from Albrecht Dürer. To her parents' dismay, however, George has not been able to win her heart. When Suzanne runs away with the unworthy Hans, George, to his credit in ultimate peril, tracks them down, eventually finding Suzanne in Frankfurt, deceived, dishonored, and abandoned, and living a shameful life among a wandering band of migrants. Now a disgrace to her family, she is sent away to a cloister after George brings her back home, broken in body at the hands of thugs sent by Hans, as well as in his heart by Suzanne. George soon lies stricken on his deathbed. Learning of his condition, Suzanne is permitted to visit him before he dies. And while in town, she also seeks to see her father, who initially refuses her request because he cannot forgive her for the shame and hurt she has caused him. After the intervention of a priest, however, the two do meet, and once alone with the father, Suzanne pours out her heart, telling him how, by running off with Hans, she has ruined her own life, shamed the Buschler family name, and caused George's death. In a dramatic scene, her father tells her he can forgive her only if she is no longer the woman she was. And after they talk some more, he becomes convinced that she is a changed woman. The prodigal daughter then shares with her forgiving father a heartfelt wish to leave the nun's life, for which she is not suited, and return home to become his loyal and dutiful housekeeper for as long as she lives. As an account of Hermann Buschler's political career, the novelist's tale would certainly have pleased the Bürgermeister of Ole, and perhaps Anna as well, but as a description of the relationship, the story of Suzanne could only have left the real father and daughter wincing. Suzanne is not the daughter Anna was, or wanted to be, nor is the novelist's Bürgermeister the father Hermann Buschler was or could have become. If aught has served the truth poorly in Anna's case, so also has the small attention paid her by history. Although the historian's treatment is factual by comparison with the novelist's, it has also failed to bring her to life as the person she was. The late great historian of early modern Hole, Gerd Wunder, devotes several pregnant passages to Anna in his magisterial social history of Hole, portraying her as a beautiful, insubordinate daughter whose feuding with her father ended his brilliant political career prematurely in the mid-1520s. That scandal, however, is seen to have been largely of her father's own making, and the historian holds Hermann Buschler himself responsible for his early retirement from politics. For whereas any father living at the time would have had good reason to be unhappy with a daughter like Anna, the Bürgermeister had overstepped his bounds as a citizen, if not also as a parent, when by stealthy means he obtained an imperial mandate permitting him to take Anna back into his paternal custody, knowing all the while that a lawsuit between them was then pending before the city council. As for Anna's life, the historian no more than the novelist saw any direct connections between her fate and the treatment she received at the hands of her father, her siblings, and the city council. For wonder, her life was the tragic transformation of a pugnacious and amorous young girl into a quarrelsome and degenerate old woman, the spoiled girl of the 1520s becoming the hate-filled plaintiff of the 1540s. The transformation is also seen to be entirely of Anna's own making. For both the novelist and the historian, Anna's story has one and the same moral, the tragedy that awaits those who defy the expectations of their age and culture. No more than any 16th century parent would any modern parent wish to have a willful and defiant child whose behavior embarrasses and divides the family and weakens its moral and social standing within the community at large. Fewer modern than contemporary parents, however, would agree that Anna got what she deserved for such behavior. In terms of her emotional life, Anna was dealt a far harsher blow in the mid-1520s when a vindictive father stripped her of her security and dignity than she was in later decades when it was mainly money she lost. What greater humiliation could a pugnacious and amorous woman in her mid-20s then have endured than to be rendered homeless and friendless by a prominent father, thereafter taken captive by him, forcibly transported across the countryside in full public view, and finally chained like a dog to a table in his house, there to remain for half a year, and all the while the city council that was in a position to help passively waited and watched. Not until the imperial court indicated that the city might be legally culpable for Hermann Büchler's action did the council react. Beyond that, the council in its own way managed to repeat the indignity of 1525 when, almost 20 years later in 1544, it imprisoned Anna for a period of 6 weeks, during one of which she lay chained to a hospital bed. On both occasions, in 1544 as in 1525, she had reason to believe that she would die in captivity. Upon her escape from both confinements, she could not have doubted that her life would henceforth be at best a struggle, for on both occasions she lost the support of the allies that counted most in that distant age, her immediate family and her local government. By all odds, Anna should have been crushed by the forces arrayed against her, and never have appeared prominently in the historical record. Yet she survived far beyond what either contemporaries or a modern reader might reasonably have expected. There were even some modest spoils of victory along the way, and there might have been more had she been more inclined to accept one-sided compromises. The astonishing thing is that she held out for so long and managed well against such formidable opposition. How she did it is no mystery. She had her supporters on her mother's side of the family and other friends as well, and thanks initially to Erasmus and her Rothenburg connections, and later to her two husbands, she cultivated her own noble counselors and friends in high places, who helped her make the most of her rights and opportunities. The imperial courts to which she turned never took her charges lightly, and even the city council of Hull could not look the other way when it found itself confronted by clear evidence of her father's transgression of the law. And among the townspeople who followed her trials and tribulations, there were some who believed she deserved better than she got. In the end, however, it was up to Anna herself to make these various connections and resources work to her advantage. To the extent that it can be so described, Anna Büchler was her own success story. The defining moment was surely her father's stunning cruelty in 1525. That terrible event created in Anna a lifelong rage which complemented her youthful defiance. Righteous anger inspired her through all the subsequent decades of deprivation and litigation. The opportunism of her siblings and the manipulation of the city council further fed that anger. Hers was the same emotional stuff out of which contemporary religious reforms and peasant revolts were born. The transforming experience of having been bullied and defrauded by people and institutions she had believed she could trust and rely on, and from which she might reasonably have expected some forgiveness for her youthful failings, and a more certain justice for the crime she believed had been committed against her. Anna always understood what neither the novelist nor the historian could see. A father who knew better had injured his child, and finding himself unobstructed by the city government, aware of its actions and in a position to stop them, he compounded the injury for decades, all the way to his grave and hers. Her siblings and the city council understood the situation well enough, but neither were deeply moved by it. After her father's death, her brother and sister tried in their own way to make amends by providing her with a more generous, if still grossly disproportionate, share of the family inheritance. Although the game seemed small to Anna by comparison with what she believed she had lost, she would have been well advised to accept it gratefully, and stifle her anger. The indignity she suffered in her mid-20s had been too great to allow her to do that, however, and by 1543 she had simply lived with his memory for too long. Partial compensation only poured salt in wounds that would not mend. Accepting half a loaf now could only be a way to temporize. There are injuries to the human spirit which can never be healed, and in the presence of which modern ideas of justice and fairness seem only too pale and even to punish. They are situations in which there is nothing one can say or do to make the injured whole again or to compensate the loss. Such emotional recrudescence are constant and inevitable. For those who behold such injury, the episode is simply over and done, and makes little difference whether one curses the darkness or lights a candle, for what has been broken cannot and will not be fixed this side of eternity. History is littered with such indelible injuries. The only saving grace in these situations is the injured party's own refusal to go quietly. There's a shriek of recognition, a redeeming sarcasm, a slap of defiance which ennobles a person's destruction and distinguishes it from abject defeat. By such resolve, Anna redressed her own injury and departed the world with a sense of her own worth, knowing her life had been neither a pity nor in vain. From this perspective, Anna Buchler's petty thievery and heavy petting, rejection of paternal and consular authority, and embarrassment of her family and hometown were not the only scandal in 16th century Hull. There were also the cruelty of a father, the miserly kindness of a brother and a sister, and the indifference of a city council, each of whom might, even by 16th century standards, have accommodated this unfortunate woman at modest expense to themselves. Although little note has been taken of Anna Buchler in history books and novels, and even that little bit has been unkind, in the inner battle for human dignity which goes on in every individual life beneath the great wars and reforms of an age, Anna may have been more heroic than the Bürgermeister of all in the Schenk of Lemberg. The end. Goodbye, Brabs. Goodbye.